Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our newest special COVID-19 Liberty on Lockdown. We've got some great guests today, but first I want to take a minute. I saw Mike Rowe the other day, and he talked about grief and how he can just walk around and he sees everyone in a different stage of it. Grief's such a funny word. I never think about the word grief. Even when I hear it, I think Charlie Brown saying good grief, and I think of McGruff the crime dog. Which is weird, but like that's what, like I so don't have a grasp of the concept of grief. I think of it as just a sound. I think, oh, it sounds like McGruff. Like that's, I don't think about it enough, but it's a real thing. So the root of the word means to burden. It's hardship, suffering, pain, grievance, injustice, misfortune, calamity. Right? You're getting this like heaviness to it. Usually we associate it with someone dying. But I think a better kind of definition is anytime something changes dramatically, there's a grieving process. So you can grieve when you move, grieve when you change jobs, when you graduate college. There's a grief process. And everyone's felt it during this time. Don't think you're exempt from this, Mr. Macho. Everyone has felt it. And everyone's in a different stage, as Mike Rowe said. So you have denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and then acceptance. I read a Harvard Business Review essay on this from the guy who wrote the original with Kubler-Ross and wrote it all. And he came up with a 612, meaning. So let's run through them real quick. The denial's obvious, right? This is all overblown. Media's making it up. It's the same as the flu. Or I'll be fine. I'm young. It doesn't affect healthy people. Whatever, right? Denial. And then the other side too. Oh, the economy won't be hurt. Things will bounce back. Everyone's fine, right? There's denial all over. Anger is our attempt to control our fears. Like, this is Trump's fault. Gavin Newsom's the worst. They're killing grandma. A lot of anger all over the place. Bargaining is when you're starting to accept things, but you still can't give up the illusion of control. So you make some compromises to find an easier way out, right? Like, I'll just wash my hands and it'll be fine, or whatever, right? This will be over in a week. Then things will go back to normal. Right? So you're kind of like bargaining with both things. Despair, right? You realize when the bargaining doesn't work. I can't go to work. I'll never earn money. I'll be homeless. I'm going to die alone from this. My career and life plans are ruined from us. And then acceptance, right? You accept the reality, start to deal with it as best as possible. Everyone's in a different phase. And we bounce around, right? We say the word stages as if like you go from 1 to 2 to 3, and that's not it. You can bounce all over the place. And you can have different elements of grief from, like I'm in acceptance with the virus, but I'm angry at the shutdowns right now, right? I had acceptance at the shutdowns for a while, but now conditions have changed. Now I'm kind of back to angry about it. So it's okay to bounce around. So I just want to share all this for our special today because first I wanted you to have compassion on yourself. Have you ever had these moments in life where you're in a difficult phase of your life, physically or emotionally, and you power through, and then afterwards you just crash. Your body crashes. Maybe you sleep for like 12 hours straight, and you didn't realize how much that experience took out of you. And I think there's a lot of that going on right now, right? Even if you've been powering through this like a champ, it's still taking a lot out of you. You've been working hard to take care of your family throughout this. So have some compassion on yourself first, and then on others, right? Oh, that person's angry, understandably. That person's bargaining, that person's in denial. Where am I in denial? Compassion on yourself, compassion on others. We all have fear, all right? There's a fear of getting it, fear of spreading it, fear of losing a job, fear if you're ever gonna find another job, fear of your kids falling behind in school, fear, who knows, right? We all have one. So let's be gracious to everyone. I think of my mom, she's on the other side of the country. She's never seen her grandchild, who's 3 months old. Will she ever? Will she in their 70s ever fly across the country to see her grandchild in person? I don't know, that's a real grief. So everyone's got one and we're all figuring it out at different speeds. Today's special, we have a barber who has defied state orders to shut down. We're gonna talk to a pastor who's done the same. Why are they doing, the whys actually are the most beautiful things. So wait to hear that. And then also we're gonna talk with Alan Dershowitz to talk about the legality of all this. What are your constitutional rights in a pandemic? Glad you're here. COVID-19, Liberty on Lockdown. Coming up, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special COVID-19 Liberty on Lockdown, but not for our next guest, Mr. Carl Mankey, a barber, in Michigan. Mr. Mankey, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, sir.
Really good to talk to you. How long have you been barbering, sir?
Well, I'm in my 60th year. I started in 1961.
Unreal. Have you ever seen anything like this?
You know, I've been through 14 administrations. I was born in 1942 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You know, I've survived 14 administrations. I have never seen anything like this. Not even in the 1960s when, you know, there was a uproar and the government, of course, was, you know, at that time it was the Republicans that were the bad guys and the Democrats were the good guys. And this is one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, the Democrat Party back in the 1960s and 70s were for free speech, for human rights, for the dignity of man, you know, no oppression from government. They've completely flipped on this one. Now they've become the oppressive government, censoring speech, you know, taking tyrannical stands for power, illegal stands for power in the hopes that they can tie it up in the courts long enough to get done what they want. And then, of course, you know, then the rest of us are the pawns that get pushed around in this thing. And I'm tired of being a pawn.
Beautiful. And you've been a face of this now, and you're doing it the right way. Take us back to March, at the beginning of March when this whole thing first happened. What was your first thoughts on it all when the government told you to shut down? Did you initially? And what were your thoughts on that at first?
Yeah, you know, all my thoughts were, you know, that first of all, the agendas, you know, that were coming out, you know, that people were standing on. I noticed right away that there was a hope, a wish that somehow or other this economy would collapse. You know, and from the standpoint of collapsing, the longer they could make it last, the better it would be for, you know, the Liberal Party. And I was kind of a little bit skeptical of that at the time, that they would be willing to destroy the economy in the country, you know, just for a political agenda. But the more I see the determination in some of these folks that are especially those that are career politicians, that's what they are doing. You know, if they can hope that the economy will collapse, they can stretch it out a little bit longer. You know, the hopes is that even though we can destroy the economy, we may win in the fall. You know, we have a chance of winning if our present administration can't take credit for a good economy. So I see these things, you know, and of course people discuss that in my shop. You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes bantered around here. It is. And March 1st, March 13th, 14th, someplace right in there, they declared that we had to shut down for 2 weeks. Well, in the 59 years and going into my 60th year, I've never shut down 2 weeks for anything. You know, I've never had a sick day, you know, so, yeah, well, these are the kind of crazy things, you know, that right now that maybe middle America has a grasp on some of this stuff that maybe on the two coasts they don't have. But we have a grasp that there's more to the human being than just the physical protection. Our politicians,
let me ask you about that again. I think that's such an interesting point. I love that. What do you mean by that? There's more to our life than just our physical safety. What do you mean?
Yeah, all I mean by this is that I'm an author. I've written 10 novels, and I know the human being pretty well, you know, and I know that we're made up physically, you know, that's one part of us. The other components are mental and spiritual. Now, you put people into their homes for 2-3 months, telling them that they have to stay there because we're protecting you physically. You're going to end up with a vacated, empty mental and spiritual being. And they don't even know that it's happened. I mean, I see this fear growing and growing and growing and growing on people that are locked up in their houses. You know, they're not aware of they're just hoping, you know, that somehow or other the government will lead them out of this. Well, I don't trust that. You know, I don't trust that the government is here to help me in that sense. I believe that, you know, as a free American, I have to at some point take responsibility for my own life and for my family's life. And in that sense, balancing this thing out where we have a physical, mental, and spiritual health. You know, that's the important thing to me right now. You know, I had to
please go ahead.
Yeah, I had to go back to work from a a mental and spiritual standpoint as well as a physical one. All my taxes were due, my insurances were due, my credit rating, which I worked on for the last 60 years, is good. And I did not want that jeopardized. I had people that said, well, you could have gone on food stamps. I don't want food stamps. I have a craft. I'm able to work. I don't even know what food stamps are. God bless that we do have food stamps for those that need that net, but to make a lifestyle out of food stamps, that's not within my realm here. It's just not. I'm not going to do that. I worked all my life. I have no intentions of not working. Somebody asked me, well, when are you going to retire? I said, well, the day Jesus comes, either for me or for everybody, I'll have my funeral in the morning and my retirement party in the afternoon. So, it's going to be all this.
That's great. What are, and you reminded me of a segment we did a week or so ago. Mike Rowe, I'm sure you know Mike Rowe, the dirty jobs guy. He said, it's not safety first. It's safety third. You can only put safety first, and in your words, the physical safety as the most important thing for a little while before you need to actually have all the other important things of life balanced out properly. And we've lost that balance now that we're 3 months into this thing. I just wanted one last question on that, because I think that's such a beautiful theme. What do you think what is the government taking away from people the most throughout this time? What are people losing of themselves now that we're 3 months into this lockdown?
They're losing an individual spirit. They're being told to doubt their own urgings of their soul and to trust the rattlings of the politicians, the rattlings of the government, the administration. It's sort of like, I think I remember Ronald Reagan said that, the 9 most words to be feared were, we're from the government and we're here to help you. That's a real thing. And when we put those words, other than just being just a trite saying, into our lives, we realize that's true. We have to take control of our own lives. The government is here to govern, not rule. And when they begin this rules thing, it's when it becomes tyrannical. And the thing is that they don't realize that they're doing it because, Machiavelli, years ago, that will to power, good heavens, that's still alive and well. You create a vacuum and somebody's going to fill that. Nature abhors a vacuum. Yeah. Somebody will try to fill that power structure.
You're in Michigan, so I'm in California, in San Diego. I kind of expect this stuff out of California, right? Are you surprised that Michigan is maybe the state with the governor who's acting the craziest out of them all? Give us a little sense of the people of Michigan and what they're willing to put up with or not put up with.
Well, the people in Michigan, we're a blue-collar state. We're a working-class state. At one time, of course, the unions were very strong here and very powerful here. And the Democrat Party was, they were a party to reckon with. Now it's become the party of welfare, and we have a certain part of our community down in the Detroit area that need help. And some of them do and some of them don't. And the will to work has been taken away from an awful lot of people. And, as long as the government can continue to give you enough money to, pay for your phone and, have a few recreational things that you want to do here and there. But, these are the things that right now that young Americans have to take into stride with themselves and ask themselves, is my freedom worth giving up for this momentary little bit of safety and security that they're promising me in this maybe a check from the government? It's a trap. I've seen it in my own shop. I've seen it with my own people here, with people in Michigan. You get in a bad spot and you need something. You need some help, maybe from SSI or something. Pretty soon, you're scared to go back to work because you're going to lose your SSI. It's a fear factor. And that fear is really the thing that has to be overcome. That's the thing that drives all of this is fear, 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 fear. And when we begin to trust our own abilities to be able to make my own life, make my own decisions, and not have, someone say, well, I think that was a stupid thing. Really, we have to honestly look at each other and weigh each other. What is your impetus behind this? Why are you doing what you're doing? These are questions that I think as Americans we have to ask ourselves. If we want freedom, nature abhors a vacuum. If we don't hang on to what we have here with our Constitution, with our Bill of Rights, with our Judeo-Christian ethics, if we don't hang on to these things, there will be another group somewhere that says, well, we can fill that vacuum very quickly. And they will, it's like squeezing a balloon. They'll fill that vacuum with something that we may not want.
And it'll sound good as they're coming in to fill it.
It sounds good. Yeah, this is the other thing. I want to make this point. Sometimes these things are good. There's many things that are good, but they can become the absolute worst enemy of the best. And I think we have to look at what the best is for us as Americans, and let some of these so-called goods slip by and go to the higher standard.
You got to break that down a little more. What do you mean by that?
I mean, sometimes something can appear to be good. So we'll buy into that good, like, okay, for security, right now, the government will take care of this for security reasons. Well, the better is that we don't let that happen more than maybe a week, and then we start pulling back on that. What happens, you give power to people that are in power. They don't give it back, and that becomes the worst enemy of the best. The best is that we remain free. It may be good if they step in sometimes, protect us, from that standpoint. Maybe like 911, I remember that. Next thing you know, they're tapping phones.
Yeah. Carl, I got one last question for you. I'm sure you, in your 60 plus years of being a barber, I'm sure you've wanted nothing more than to go on nationwide TV shows and fight the governor with lawsuits. And be the face and the leading charge. This is your dream come true, right, Carl?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. A month ago, 2 months ago, I was just as famous as I wanted to be. Now, our governor here has made me into this icon that I've become. I don't mind being a voice for people that maybe didn't have the words, didn't have the platform. All of a sudden, I have a platform now. And I'll speak for others. I'll become that voice. I'm willing to do that. But it's no. Honestly, I'm a simple man. I'm a middle-class guy. I own a barbershop. I'm an author. And that's my life. So I didn't need all this. I really didn't. And even now, with all of this stuff, my wife took the TV out back in March when this whole thing started because it was an extra couple of $100 a month that we didn't need. We didn't have television. So trying to get it turned back on, finally last week we got turned back on. So I've seen none of this. I've seen little bits and pieces that somebody showed me on their phone, but as far as I know none of this.
I think that's why you have so much wisdom, because you're not distracted by the daily in and out inundation of the fear and other things that you've talked about. Carl, we have to run, sir. I hate to cut you off because I feel like we could talk forever. Maybe I'll make a trip up to Michigan when we're allowed, and I'll get my hair cut from the one and only Carl.
Break out. I'm going to urge people, in Michigan, to stand up for our freedom, stand up for what you believe, stand up for that urgency in your soul that's talking, not that muddling stuff that's wrapping around in your head from the internet, but right in your soul. Answer that, stand up. And I'm going to encourage my other small business people, open up. And now believe me, the people will come. Just like the Field of Dreams. You open up, They'll be there, they'll come.
You're a good man, Carl. I hope we can talk again, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. COVID-19, Liberty on Lockdown, not with Carl. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hi, Slater Crusaders. Welcome back to our special COVID-19 Liberty on Lockdown. So obviously, closing of churches has been a bit of a problem in America for a while, particularly in California. To talk about that, We have Robert Tyler. He is the president of Advocates for Faith and Freedom and a partner at Tyler and Birch, and also Pastor Sharpen, who is the pastor at Rock Valley Christian Church in Murrieta, California, in Southern California. Gentlemen, how are you guys?
Hello, doing well. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Pastor, I know you were one of 1,200 pastors, I believe it was, who said that you guys are going to open up this Sunday, whether you are allowed to or not. Pastor, why was that important for you to open up now?
Well, actually, Mike, we opened a couple of weeks ago at Rock Valley Church in really defiance of the governor's order. We wanted to open up because we were ready to serve our brethren. And I co-pastor with a dear friend of mine, David Liesenfeld. So our pastoring at Rock Valley Church, we just felt that the people that we pastor and shepherd needed to come together. And we knew that we had not only the Constitution backing us, but we believe that we ought to obey God rather than man.
Let's get a little background here. Robert, what are churches allowed to do? Like, what is Gavin Newsom saying churches can or cannot do as of now?
Sure. Last Monday, Gavin Newsom came out with new regulations that he allowed churches, so to speak, to get together and meet. Now, generally the guidelines that he put forth are acceptable, with the exception of the fact that he's limiting churches to 25% of their occupancy or 100 persons, whichever is more. And, when we launched this effort, this campaign.
Was it whichever's more or was it whichever's less?
I'm sorry. You're right. Whichever's less. Forgive me. So whichever's less. And that's just not acceptable, especially for so many churches. And just legally, the reason why is because the restaurants are not limited in the same fashion. You could have 200 people in a restaurant as long as they can distance themselves by 6 feet. So it's the same thing for churches. You could have a church that has, 1,500 seats, and there's no reason why they should be limited to 100. So, but before that, in setting this whole thing up, about 4 weeks ago, with many of our clients, we represent many churches, and we just came to the conclusion that it's time to open up. The governor's never going to allow us to open up if we don't do something about it. And so we decided that it would work well if everyone, if many churches came together and said, we're all going to open together on the same day. And what's going to happen at that point in time is the governor going to come in and arrest every pastor in California. They're going to cite every pastor. So now we have up to 1,500 pastors who have signed this declaration of essentiality that we have on our website. And as that grew and grew, it really appears the governor was getting a lot more pressure, because we declared these churches are going to open with or without permission. We welcome his offer of establishing some guidelines. However, we'll establish our own guidelines. We're not asking for permission. We're going to move forward, and these churches are going to reopen because the Constitution gives us this constitutional right, and we don't have to ask the governor for such permission. And so the Sixth Circuit ruled. We had a great ruling from the Sixth Circuit that helped establish this legal right that we know exists. And so at that point in time, we began moving forward, and we were talking to the Department of Justice and trying to get them involved. And sure enough, they sent the governor a letter, and that letter was real helpful. And then we publicized our letter, and next thing we know, the president's weighing in. So it's real helpful.
Yeah, that's right. Good for you guys. Well done. I think it's interesting, this idea that you, pastor, don't want to, like it's almost like the idea is you want to get your congregation sick, right? Like, oh, you won't take any safety precautions and you want half your congregation to die from COVID. Of course not. You're going to take all the proper precautions. What are some of the negative implications that you've seen in your community because you guys have been closed or haven't been able to meet together for a couple months?
Well, it's interesting that the very word church in the Greek is ekklesia, which means a gathering or an assembly of people. So the very definition of church is that we come together. That's what we do. We church together. And so when you think about being able to pray for people, to lay hands on the sick, and to seek the Lord together, to sing and worship together. Another pastor friend of mine used the analogy that worshiping via video stream is like the difference between having a warm fire in front of you and looking at a picture of a fire in front of you. And so that idea of coming together in the unity of the faith, because we are the body of Christ and we all play different roles. And so when we're separated, it's extraordinarily difficult to fulfill the mission and the purpose for which God not only gave the church, but also gave each one of us individually. And so it has just been remarkable and such a refreshing experience to come back together as a church and worship the Lord together.
That's so wonderful. So I'm rooting for you guys, because there was a church up in Northern California that met on Mother's Day. And there was someone sick there, and we don't know how much it was spread and what the ramifications were. But I'm just hoping that nothing really bad happened then. This is before anyone was taking proper precautions, I think. And I hope nothing bad happens then, because then Gavin Newsom's going to use that as proof. Look, we got to shut all the churches down again because it was really bad. So I'm just praying that everything goes really well. So that being said, you guys have been open for a while. So what are some best practices? What are some precautions you guys have taken that you think other churches should take too, so that there is not a big outbreak in a church?
Sure. And so what we're doing at Rock Valley Christian Church is we have a sanctuary such that we are social distancing as we are sitting there. So we're grouping families together. We're grouping people who are, if you will, family units. And so, yeah, that means that we have substantially fewer people in our sanctuary than we would like. But at this point, we feel that that's a right and appropriate thing. And additionally, we're doing all of the things that the CDC would suggest that we do, whether it's common, handles that we're sanitizing and just being mindful of those sorts of things. But at the same time, what we're not doing, and what Costco doesn't do, and what other businesses don't do, and what people on airplanes don't do, is we are asking people to self-police. So if you are engaging in a conversation, we're not walking around as the pastors trying to micromanage what people are doing. But as it relates to the component for which we're responsible, which is the worship service, we are having people social distance as they sit. And we certainly hope that some of those regulations change very quickly.
Yeah, that's right. Robert, talk a bit about the Sixth Circuit ruling. What exactly did they say? How did it get there? And what are the implications for this?
Sure. Out in Kentucky, there was a lawsuit that was initiated by some colleagues. And what happened there was the Sixth Circuit took a case up on an emergency appeal and essentially ruled that the guidelines, or I should say the prohibition on churches meeting in person was unconstitutional, because as the Sixth Circuit said, I'll paraphrase, there's no reason to think that people can be safe when they go to a grocery store, but cannot be safe when they go to a church, that somehow they're going to, leave all inhibitions aside when they go to church. And so the Sixth Circuit ruled that it was unconstitutional under the Free Exercise Clause to prohibit churches from coming together and meeting. Now, if there was a complete ban on any meetings, on anybody even going to the grocery store, and everybody had to stay in for 24 hours, that's a different story. But that's not what's happening here. The governors of the states are acting like dictators, and they're picking winners and losers, and they're deciding who can come out and play and who can't. We're being told, who can go out and watch the sunset and who can't. And so some of these things are just really becoming so unreasonable. And that's why these pastors came together and just said, you know what, enough is enough. And, there's so many people that are hurting. The suicide, the depression, the mental anxiety, the loss of employment by so many people is one of those things that's driving so many factors of negative consequences. And as a result of this, the churches have to get back. They are the safety net for society.
Talk about essential. And I'm sure the president's message the other day was encouraging to you guys. It was to me, I think most, not Newsom. Pastor, I want to end with you, sir. Kind of a twofold question. You've seen your congregation or members of it come back after being away for so long. So I'd love if you could speak to just their posture and their faces and their souls just being restored and what that looked like and what that felt like. And then maybe if you could speak for a minute about any perhaps good that you think has come from this whole whatever this is. Not necessarily churches being closed, but just this sort of forced Sabbath in a way that has been thrust upon us. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I will say that there were a lot of smiles and a lot of tears when we did come back together. Again, you think about something so intimate and spiritual as a church and church brethren. I mean, we are a family. And so when you separate family in that sense, it's a very, depressing, very sobering thing. And so it was just an unbelievable experience, like I said, coming back together. And so when you think about that from the standpoint of we're there to serve people, here's what it did, Mike, and to answer your second question, I thought that, being a very thankful person, being a person who appreciates and doesn't want to take things for granted, in the 10 weeks that we were closed, I have to admit, I took coming to church together, I took that for granted. So that was a huge lesson for me. And I think what it also did is it caused all of us to reflect on what are our constitutional rights, and more importantly, as important as the Constitution is and the First Amendment to assemble together, what's even more important is the fact that, like I said, we have to obey God rather than man. There were times when people defied the government, whether it's when Daniel came and prayed, opened his window and prayed openly, or whether it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They defied the governmental authorities at the time because they had a faith in their God that they were not going to compromise. And so we finally realized that's the situation we were in. Look, again, early in this process, we didn't know. We thought death rates might be 3, 4, 5%. And what's clear now from the data is that this is nowhere near the significance in terms of the permutations of death rates that we originally thought it was. And so we still need to be cautious. We still need to take appropriate provisions. But the whole shutting down process, and certainly with churches, was now an overplayed hand, and we learned a good lesson.
I'm grateful, Pastor. I'm certain that because of what you've done, Pastor, and Robert, what you've spearheaded, you, without a doubt, I don't want to say pressured, encouraged the president to make his statement, which then put the pressure on Gavin Newsom to allow churches to open up to some extent. And we'll keep pushing to make sure we get over that 100-person maximum, which is, as you said, are ridiculous. Robert Tyler from Advocates for Faith and Freedom, and Pastor Sharp in Rock Valley Christian Church in Marietta. Gentlemen, appreciate you guys very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for being here. COVID-19, Liberty on lockdown. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to Liberty on Lockdown. An honor to talk to our next guest, Harvard professor and author of Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence in the Age of Me Too, Professor Alan Dershowitz. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Back in 1970, I wrote a series of articles about civil liberties during times of emergency. And let me tell you, it's really coming to fruition, all the points I made in that article and those articles and in a couple of books that I've written. This is a very complicated constitutional issue. We've never had a precedent for this before. We've had pandemics before, but the last major pandemic was 1917, 1918, and the constitutional law wasn't as sophisticated or established as it is today. And yet there are still many, many issues that remain unresolved.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, so what has changed from 1918 to today constitutionally or Supreme Court-wise?
I think the Supreme Court has become much more sensitive to civil liberties. Back in 1905, for example, the Supreme Court, without any dissent, said, of course, mandatory vaccinations are constitutionally permissible. The declaration of martial law has been upheld and sustained. Today, I think there'd be more litigation about many of those issues. The country is more deeply divided. the constitutional law is, if anything, less settled now than it was back then. And so I think we're in for a period of time in which there will be a lot of litigation, and I suspect some 5-4 Supreme Court decisions.
Wow. Okay, let's roll through a bunch of them. So maybe I know you made a lot of news last week or so with vaccines. So you want to rehash that, and maybe what is our constitutional right to not have a vaccine?
Well, it depends on the vaccine. If the vaccine is safe and effective and necessary to prevent or control pandemics, then I think the Supreme Court, not 5-4, but 8-1 or 9-0, would uphold mandatory vaccinations with exclusions for people who have medical conditions, and it would have to be a vaccine that's designed for public health. For example, if they suddenly developed a vaccine for cancer or for heart disease, that could not be compulsory. You have the right to save your own life or to risk your own life, but you don't have the right to be Typhoid Mary. You don't have the right to walk around contagious and infect other people. If you're prepared to stay in your home and be isolated and quarantined during the pandemic, or for the rest of your life for that matter, then you can avoid being vaccinated. But for example, many states now require vaccination of children as a condition for going to public school because they don't want to contaminate other people. That's been universally upheld. So I suspect that the Supreme Court would uphold vaccination. Look, people say you can't take our liberty away, but the Supreme Court has upheld the draft. What could be more imposing on liberty than being drafted and risking your own life? And by the way, when you're drafted, you have to get vaccinated. You have to get a lot of injections when you're drafted. If the draft is constitutional to protect the national interest, I would think it's a pretty easy case that vaccine is constitutional as long as the conditions that I've set out are met.
Very interesting. So we went back to the Supreme Court case in question. I forget when it was, but it was in Cambridge, and this guy, he didn't want to get the vaccine, obviously. Right. But you say the Supreme Court, and back then they said, well, in extreme circumstances, you don't have to. Wouldn't that guy have been in extreme circumstance? He had a really bad reaction back in Sweden when he got a vaccine. He didn't want to do it again. Why wasn't he an exemption?
I think he probably should have been. And today, I think maybe we would find an exemption. Look, we found exemptions for the draft as well, and for many, many others. Let me tell you what's not an exemption, and that is a religious claim. The law is clear. This is Justice Scalia, who is very, very supportive of religion. The law is clear. If there's a law of general application, it's not designed to discriminate against religion. If everybody has to do it, just because it's against your religion to do it doesn't mean you have the right not to do it. You can be a civil disobedient. You can say God comes before the law, but you know what happens to civil disobedience. They end up on the cross, or they end up in prison, or they end up with a fine. But you have no right constitutionally to be a civil disobedient if you place God's law over secular law. By the way, God's law clearly favors vaccination. If you go back to the Bible, you see they're so concerned about contagious diseases. If you're diagnosed with a contagious disease, you have to go beyond the city wall. You have to be quarantined 7 days, and then the high priest examines you an additional 7 days. How anybody could claim that religion is against public health is something, as somebody who studied religion and taught religion at Harvard Law School, I taught the scriptural sources of justice. I can't imagine the religious argument today against public health concerns.
Wow, what a fascinating course that would be. So real quick on the suspending your religious rights or shutting down churches specifically. You're saying a federal government or the state in a time of pandemic or emergency has the constitutional ability and right to shut down churches?
No, I don't think so. I'll tell you why. First of all, you can't specify that if you say you're shutting down churches, synagogues, mosques, that's religious discrimination. Yep. But what if you shut down everything? Look, if you shut down everything, that might be constitutional. But if you allow Walmarts to stay open, you allow gyms to stay open, you allow other places of gathering to stay open, and you say, no, but not churches. Walmarts is essential, but religion is not essential. That raises very serious questions under the First Amendment, and I think the churches would prevail on that one.
Got it. Okay, good. And I think that's why Gavin Newsom kind of lightened up and is allowing churches to open, at least with, some.
It's also said that he wants churches to be able to be open, but they have to be open with social distancing and masks. If I were a rabbi or a minister or a priest, I'd have my congregants come in their cars, sit in their cars with their windows closed, like a drive-in movie, and make my sermon to assure absolute safety. By the way, I think drive-in movies coming back.
That'd be great. Why not? That'd be a good thing. What about any other type of gathering, like just First Amendment freedom to assemble rights?
I think you have freedom to assemble, and it can't be curtailed unless you can show a very overwhelming interest in safety. For example, if people wanted to honk their horns in front of Congress, they have to be allowed to do that. If people want to gather and can do it safely to protest, the right to protest has to be assured. The right to protest against vaccines. I'm not in favor of refusing to take vaccines, but I certainly support those who have a different point of view. I've been in a dialogue now with Robert Kennedy, who's an old friend, and he's teaching me a lot. I hope maybe I'm teaching him a little. We're having a good exchange about vaccines. I certainly wouldn't suppress anybody who wanted to express views different from my own on any of these issues.
Let's talk about the press. So, you know, the reason why we even call it the Spanish flu is because Spain was the one country that was neutral and didn't suspend their press freedoms during World War I. So, you know, time of war or pandemic, what is the federal government or state government's ability to limit press?
Zero. They have no right to limit the press. There is no conceivable argument that preventing protests has any impact on the war. The Supreme Court did have a decision a long, long time ago where Justices Holmes and Brandeis dissented, allowing limitations on protests in the press. I don't think that would be sustained today. Look, you can prevent the press from printing secrets, the names of spies, the location of nuclear weapons, satellite information, but you can't prevent the press from protesting. You can't prevent the social media from having its own rules. And I hope we don't see any attempt to tamper with the freedom of the press or the freedom of the social media.
Very good. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Second Amendment in a time of crisis or pandemic.
Well, you know, nobody knows exactly what the Second Amendment says. Reasonably regulated militia, I think that gives the state the power to reasonably regulate guns. More people are buying guns now than ever before, and that happens during times of crisis. And I think the state maintains the ability to reasonably regulate, but under the Supreme Court Heller case, they can't ban guns completely.
That's such a funny line you said, interesting line. You said, nobody really knows. If our founding fathers could do it over again, would you suggest they reword the Second Amendment?
Look, let me tell you, I once taught a course where I graded the writers of the Constitution, Second Amendment, C-, fourth C+. First Amendment, I gave an A. But
okay.
in very, very difficult ways to understand. And of course, look, think about the issue of impeachment. You know, the framers, treason, that's easy. Bribery, that's not so hard. Or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Crime is clear. Do you mean it has to be a crime? I think so. But others obviously think it doesn't have to be a crime. Why do we need to have that debate? The framers should have put it right in there. Yes, crime, no crime, let's move on. But they don't do that.
Oh, I love that. C- on the Second Amendment. Oh, yeah. That's classic. How, Professor, we have to run and you've been generous with your time, but moving forward, how should a regular person like me think about the 10th Amendment? And I guess we can throw in the 14th, but let's just focus on the 10th Amendment in a time like this.
Boy, you talk about vague amendments. The 10th Amendment wins the prize. It was obviously put in there as a residual guarantee of freedom. It wanted to make a very important point. The difference between, for example, the old Soviet Union and us. In the old Soviet Union, unless something was specifically permitted, it was prohibited. In the United States, unless something is specifically prohibited, it's permitted. And I think the framers wanted to send a message. Look, if there's no express limitation on power, there's nothing specific, the power remains with the people and the states. We are a federalist system, and therefore the default position should be in favor of liberty, freedom, the power of the states, and the power of the people. That's the message. How to interpret that is very, very difficult. You could teach a whole course on constitutional law just on the 10th Amendment.
All right, I'll end on this one. What's the biggest constitutional struggle that you do see coming out of this?
I think the duration of the closure will raise questions. You know, the other issue that's going to be very interesting is what powers the federal government has in relation to the state governments, what powers governors have in relation to state legislatures. The issues of separation of powers and federalism haven't been focused on a lot, but they're very important because it's governors today who are shutting things down and presidents who are shutting them down and opening them up. And yet the Constitution gives most of the authority to the legislature, not the executive. The executive is supposed to enforce the law, but the legislature is supposed to make the law. But during times of emergencies, we find the executive branch, governors, mayors, presidents, making the law as well as enforcing it. That's going to be a big question.
250 years and we still haven't figured this thing out quite yet. Is that a bug or a feature of our government?
I tell you, it's the most enduring constitution in the history of the world. And the ambiguities cut both ways. They give us the ability to interpret and construe. Yeah. But, you know, there are some parts of the Constitution which are not subject to interpretation. If you're 34 years and 11 months old, you can't be president. That's it.
That's right. A+ on clarity there. Professor, if I may, I'm grateful whenever I see you on any other show, and particularly this one, but that you're not just keeping your wisdom inside the halls of Harvard University, because you could very easily do that and never talk to anyone and still go down in history. But I'm just grateful that you're getting your voice and the truth out there, sir.
Well, I appreciate it so much. I'm a teacher, and I love teaching, no matter who my audience is.
Oh, that's right. Perfect. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mike Slater, true story, COVID-19, liberty on lockdown. We'll be back on Monday. Spread the word.